Russia intensifies deadly strikes on Ukrainian ports. In late December 2025, Russian missiles once again slammed into Ukraine's ports, but beneath the explosions lies a deeper truth about who really controls the Black Sea. The bitter cold of December 2025 has descended upon the Black Sea, but the waters remain dangerously hot, with the fires of a conflict that has fundamentally reshaped naval warfare. In the closing days of the year, specifically around December 23, the world witnessed a dramatic and deadly intensification of Russian missile strikes targeting the vital port infrastructure of southern Ukraine. These attacks, focused on the Odessa region and the deep-water port of Pivdeny, serve as a brutal reminder of the Kremlin's persistent strategy to weaponize global food security. Yet, beneath the smoke of these immediate strikes lies a far more profound narrative, one that military analysts and naval historians are only beginning to fully articulate. It is the story of how a nation with virtually no conventional navy has not only survived the onslaught of a purported maritime superpower, but has systematically dismantled its dominance, forcing the once feared Black Sea Fleet into a humiliating retreat. While the headlines scream of Russian missiles striking grain silos and civilian vessels, the underlying reality of late 2025 is that Ukraine has achieved a level of sea control that was unimaginable at the war's outset, transforming the Black Sea into a kill box for Russian warships and securing an economic lifeline that Moscow is powerless to sever. The events of late December 2025 provide a stark window into this dynamic. In a span of less than 48 hours, Russian forces launched a barrage of ballistic missiles and drones at the Odessa region, specifically targeting the logistical hubs responsible for feeding millions across the global south. On the night of December 19, extending into the early hours of December 20, a concentrated strike on port infrastructure near Odessa killed at least 8 people and wounded dozens more. The missiles slammed into storage facilities and transport networks, igniting fires that burned through the winter night, visible for miles along the coast. Among the targets damaged in this wave of aggression were civilian vessels, including the Turkish-owned cargo ship Cenk T, which was moored at the port of Kornomorsk. The imagery of a commercial vessel, engaged in the peaceful transit of food, engulfed in flames, serves as a potent symbol of the indiscriminate nature of this campaign. These were not military targets in any conventional sense. They were the arteries of global commerce, attacked in a desperate bid to strangle Ukraine's economy. However, to view these strikes in isolation is to miss the strategic paralysis afflicting the Russian military command. The intensification of attacks on static port infrastructure is not a sign of growing Russian strength, but rather a symptom of their total loss of operational freedom at sea. By late 2025, the Russian Black Sea Fleet, once the undisputed master of these waters, had been effectively routed from the western Black Sea. They can no longer enforce a blockade with warships because those warships are being hunted to extinction. The fleet that once threatened an amphibious landing on Odessa is now cowering in ports hundreds of miles to the east, and even there, they are not safe. The strikes on Odessa are the lashes of a cornered adversary, capable of causing pain and tragedy, but incapable of altering the strategic reality that Ukraine now dictates the rules of engagement in the maritime domain. This shift in power was underscored by a historic operational success that occurred just days before the missile barrage on Odessa. On the 15th of December 2025, Ukrainian forces executed a strike that will likely be studied in naval academies for decades to come. For the first time in the history of warfare, an unmanned underwater vehicle, a subsea baby drone, successfully engaged and struck a submarine docked at a naval base. The target was a Kilo-class diesel-electric submarine, one of the quietest and most modern assets in the Russian arsenal, berthed at the Novorossiysk naval base. Novorossiysk was supposed to be the sanctuary. After Ukrainian missile and surface drone strikes made Sevastopol in occupied Crimea a death trap for the Black Sea Fleet, Moscow withdrew its most valuable assets to Novorossiysk, located on the internationally recognized territory of the Russian Federation, far to the east. They believed distance would provide safety. The December 15 strike shattered that illusion. The implications of this single event are staggering. It demonstrated that Ukraine's reach now extends across the entire breadth of the Black Sea and, crucially, beneath its surface. The Kilo-class submarines, often used to launch caliber cruise missiles at Ukrainian cities from the safety of submerged positions, are no longer immune. By striking the submarine in its home port, Ukraine proved that there is no rear area for the Russian Navy. The psychological impact on Russian crews cannot be overstated. They are being hunted in their own bases by adversaries they cannot see, using technology that costs a fraction of the assets it destroys. This is the definition of asymmetric dominance. Ukraine has not just negated Russia's naval advantage, it has inverted the cost-benefit analysis of naval power projection, making every Russian sortie a potential suicide mission. This dominance at sea is the primary reason the Ukrainian maritime grain corridor continues to function despite the missile threats. By December 2025, reports confirmed that nearly 100 million tons of cargo had been exported through the Ukrainian corridor since its unilateral establishment in August 2023. This figure is a testament to the failure of the Russian blockade. When Russia withdrew from the UN-brokered Black Sea Grain Initiative, the Kremlin assumed that no ship owner or insurer would risk transiting the waters without Russian permission. They were wrong. Ukraine, through the systematic destruction of Russian naval capability, sinking the cruiser Moskva, destroying landing ships, and forcing the fleet to retreat, created a security umbrella that allowed commercial shipping to resume. The corridor hugs the coastlines of NATO members Romania and Bulgaria before entering Ukrainian waters, a route secured not by diplomatic agreement but by the hard power of Ukrainian coastal defenses and the threat of drone retaliation. The resilience of this corridor is remarkable given the context. Every ship that docks in Greater Odessa does so under the umbrella of air defense systems that are working overtime, and every ton of grain that leaves is a victory of logistics over terror. The December strikes on the port of Pivdeni and the damage to Turkish vessels like the Cenk T were calculated attempts to spook the international shipping community, to drive up insurance premiums, and to freeze the flow of exports. Yet, the ships keep coming. The global demand for Ukrainian agricultural products, wheat, corn, sunflower oil, remains high, and the market has priced in the risks, largely because the Ukrainian Navy has proven it can keep the Russian surface fleet at bay. The Russian Navy cannot interdict these merchant vessels physically, because to sail a warship into the northwestern Black Sea is to invite a strike from a Sea Baby or Magura V-5 drone. Therefore, Russia resorts to long-range missile strikes, a tactic of attrition that causes damage but fails to achieve the strategic objective of a total blockade. Furthermore, Ukraine's counteroffensive capabilities have expanded beyond the Black Sea, illustrating a widening of the theater that further stretches Russian defenses. In the same week as the Odessa strikes, verified reports emerged of Ukrainian drone attacks targeting Russian assets in the Caspian Sea. This is a profound escalation in reach. The Caspian, an inland sea bordering Russia, Kazakhstan, Turkmenistan, Iran, and Azerbaijan, has traditionally been a safe launch pool for Russian strategic bombers and naval vessels firing missiles at Ukraine. By striking oil rigs and naval assets in the Caspian, Ukraine is signaling that no corner of Russian operational space is secure. The strikes on oil infrastructure are particularly damaging, as they target the economic engine that funds the Kremlin's war machine. These long-range operations require sophisticated intelligence and logistical planning, demonstrating a level of maturity in Ukrainian strike capabilities that far exceeds the ragtag characterization often used by Russian propaganda. The narrative of late 2025 is also defined by the sheer variety of the threats Russia faces. It is not just about missiles or aerial drones anymore. The naval war has evolved into a complex ecosystem of surface and subsurface threats. The Ukrainian security services, the SBU, and the GUR have pioneered the development of naval drones that are faster, stealthier, and more heavily armed than previous generations. The Sea Baby drones, originally used to damage the Kerch Bridge, have been upgraded to carry thermobaric warheads and even air-to-air missiles to defend themselves against Russian helicopters. The introduction of the subsurface variant used in Novorossiysk represents a quantum leap in this technology. A submarine, the ultimate stealth asset, was taken out by a robotic drone, marking a pivot point in naval history comparable to the sinking of the Bismarck or the Battle of Taranto. It signifies the democratization of lethality. A nation without a shipyard capable of building a destroyer has neutralized a fleet that cost billions to construct. While the Russian military apparatus attempts to spin the port strikes as successful disruption of Western arms supplies, the reality on the ground and on the water tells a different story. The port infrastructure, while damaged, is repaired with astonishing speed. The Ukrainian energetic sector and port workers have developed a rapid response capability, restoring power and loading capacity, often within days of a strike. This resilience is a form of resistance that parallels the military effort. The strikes in December caused power outages in Odessa and killed civilians, a tragedy that deepens the resolve of the local population rather than breaking it. The targeting of the bridge across the Dniester estuary, a key logistical link to the Danube ports, further indicates Russia's intent to sever the connection with Europe. Yet, alternative routes are found, pontoon crossings are established, and the flow of goods continues. The rigidity of Russian planning contrasts sharply with the adaptability of Ukrainian logistics. It is crucial to understand the dominance mentioned here, not as a traditional command of the sea where Ukrainian battleships patrol the horizon. Ukraine does not have battleships, but as a dominance of denial. Ukraine has denied Russia the use of the Black Sea for offensive amphibious operations. It has denied Russia the ability to intimidate merchant shipping with surface vessels. It has denied Russia the sanctuary of its own naval bases. This is the modern definition of sea control for a smaller power, the ability to prevent the stronger adversary from achieving its objectives while securing one's own core interests. Ukraine's core interest is the export of grain and the protection of its coastline. Despite the December missile barrage, both of these objectives are being met. Russia's core objective was the amphibious capture of Odessa and the total economic strangulation of Ukraine. Both of these have failed. The international dimension of the port strikes also plays heavily into Ukraine's favor diplomatically, if not immediately, militarily. The damage to the Turkish ship Cenk T and other foreign-flagged vessels draws third-party nations closer to the conflict, increasing pressure on Moscow. Turkey, which controls the Bosphorus Strait and acts as the gatekeeper of the Black Sea, has a direct stake in the safety of these vessels. While Ankara maintains a complex balancing act, attacks on its commercial fleet strain relations with Moscow and reinforce the necessity of the Ukrainian corridor. The silence of the Russian leadership regarding the specific targeting of these neutral ships betrays a disregard for maritime law that further isolates Russia on the world stage. Meanwhile, Ukraine continues to work with international partners to secure insurance guarantees and bolster air defenses, effectively internationalizing the protection of the grain corridor. The winter of 2025 also sees a change in the tactical patterns of Russian strikes. The use of ballistic missiles against ports, as seen in the attacks on Pivdeny, reflects a dwindling stock of precision cruise missiles or a recognition of the improved interception rates of Ukrainian air defenses against slower targets. Ballistic missiles are harder to intercept, but they are also finite and expensive. Using them to hit grain silos is a poor strategic trade-off when they are needed for military targets on the front lines. This misallocation of resources suggests a command structure driven by political directives to punish Ukraine rather than military logic. In contrast, Ukraine's strikes are surgically precise, targeting the platforms that launch the missiles, the ships, the submarines, the air bases. The destruction of the Kilo-class sub in Novorossiysk removes a launch platform permanently. Destroying a grain silo only delays a shipment temporarily. Moreover, the strikes on the Danube ports Reni and Ismail, which had intensified earlier in the war, have seen a resurgence as Russia tries to shut down every avenue of export. These river ports, sitting right on the border with NATO member Romania, are geopolitically sensitive. Russian drones crashing on Romanian soil have occurred in the past, and the renewed December campaign risks further incidents. Ukraine has leveraged these ports to move millions of tons of cargo via barges, bypassing the open sea. The Russian response has been to try and terrorize the civilian drivers and dock workers, but the sheer volume of trade passing through these river arteries confirms that the intimidation tactics have yielded diminishing returns. The resilience of the Danube route complements the deep-sea corridor, giving Ukraine a diversified export strategy that Russia lacks the capacity to fully interdict. The Subsea Baby success story serves as a technological punctuation mark to the year 2025. It reveals the maturation of Ukraine's domestic defense industry. These are not just modified jet skis anymore. They are purpose-built, military-grade autonomous systems. The ability to navigate the complex acoustic environment of a busy port like Novorossiysk, evade anti-submarine nets and detection systems, and deliver a payload to a specific berth requires high-level engineering and operations. It suggests that Ukraine has mapped the acoustic signatures of Russian ports and vessels. The Russian Navy is now fighting an enemy that knows its vulnerabilities better than it knows itself. The paralysis this induces is palpable. Russian commanders are hesitant to order ships out of port, and when they do, they are escorted by layers of security that slow down operations and consume resources. The Black Sea Fleet has become a fleet in being, existing only to survive rather than to fight. As the smoke clears over Odessa in late December, the strategic picture remains clear despite the tragedy of the immediate losses. Russia can destroy concrete and steel, it can burn grain, and it can kill innocents, but it has lost the battle for the Black Sea. It lost it the moment the Moskva sank, and it loses it further with every drone that breaches the harbor defenses of Novorossiysk. The intensification of missile strikes is the flailing of a giant that has been blinded and hamstrung. Ukraine, battered but unbroken, stands as the dominant maritime force in the region, not by tonnage, but by tenacity and innovation. The grain continues to flow, feeding the world, while the Russian fleet hides in the shadows, waiting for the next strike from the deep. The ongoing battle for the Black Sea in late 2025 serves as a microcosm of the wider war. A rigid, top-heavy, and increasingly desperate aggressor flailing against a nimble, networked, and existential defender. When Russian missiles struck the civilian infrastructure of Odessa on December 23, causing power outages and widespread damage, the intent was to break the morale of the population during the freezing winter months. This terror bombing campaign, a strategy Russia has relied on since the invasion's inception, relies on the assumption that civilian suffering translates to political capitulation. Historical evidence, and specifically the trajectory of this war, proves the opposite. The citizens of Odessa, a city with a fierce independent streak and deep maritime heritage, have adapted to the rhythm of air raid sirens and the drone of generators. The strikes do not generate calls for surrender. They generate calls for revenge and increased support for the armed forces. The psychological component of Russia's port campaign is a failure. From a purely military standpoint, the December strikes reveal a degradation in Russian intelligence and targeting capabilities. Reports from the ground indicate that while some missiles hit port facilities, others struck residential areas and empty lots, suggesting either electronic warfare interference by Ukrainian defenders or poor quality control in Russian manufacturing. Conversely, Ukraine's targeting of the Russian naval logistical chain has been ruthlessly efficient. By hitting fuel depots, ammunition dumps, and dry docks, Ukraine forces Russia to lengthen its supply lines. The retreat to Novorossiysk was not just a geographic relocation, it was a logistical nightmare. The base in Novorossiysk was never designed to support the entire Black Sea fleet. It lacks the sufficient dry dock capacity for major repairs, meaning damaged ships must either sit idle or risk the journey to other ports, exposing them to attack. Ukraine has effectively successfully weaponized geography and logistics against the Russian Navy. The economic war, fought through the grain corridors and the blockade attempts, also highlights Ukraine's diplomatic dominance. The Grain from Ukraine initiative, launched by Kyiv, successfully rallied global support, framing the export of food as a humanitarian imperative. Russia's attempts to frame its blockade as a security measure have been largely dismissed by the international community, especially the nations of the global south that rely on these shipments. By keeping the corridor open, Ukraine maintains its status as a reliable global partner, while Russia is increasingly viewed as a pariah state willing to starve vulnerable populations for political leverage. The successful transit of over 7,000 vessels through the corridor by late 2025 is a diplomatic and economic triumph that completely undermines Russia's narrative of control. Furthermore, the technological race in the Black Sea has spurred innovation that is reshaping global naval doctrine. NATO navies are watching closely. The success of Ukrainian uncrewed surface vessels, USVs, and uncrewed underwater vessels, OUVs, against a conventional fleet has rendered many traditional assumptions about naval defense obsolete. The idea that a multi-million-dollar corvette can be crippled by a drone costing a few $100,000 is a nightmare for naval procurement officers, but a boon for asymmetric warfare strategists. Ukraine is the laboratory for this new era. The strike on the Kilo-class submarine is the ultimate proof of concept. It shows that expensive, high-maintenance assets are vulnerable to cheap, disposable, and numerous threats. Russia, burdened by sanctions and a legacy military-industrial complex, struggles to adapt to this speed of innovation. They are building cages on their ships to stop drones, a crude, reactive measure that offers limited protection against the sophisticated, maneuvering drones Ukraine now deploys. The specific targeting of the Odessa region's energy infrastructure in conjunction with the port strikes is another critical aspect of the December 2025 escalation. By cutting power to the ports, Russia hopes to disable the grain elevators and loading machinery. However, Ukraine has anticipated this. The ports are increasingly operating on autonomous power grids, utilizing massive industrial generators and decentralized energy solutions supplied by Western partners. This energy island approach ensures that while the city might go dark, the port lights stay on, and the loading cranes keep moving. It is a game of cat and mouse, where the mouse is constantly rewiring the house to keep the lights on. The failure of Russia to permanently shut down the port operations despite years of trying is one of the most underreported failures of their campaign. In the waters of the Danube, the situation is equally tense, but equally indicative of Ukrainian resolve. The ports of Reni and Izmail have been transformed into fortresses of commerce. Anti-aircraft guns and electronic warfare jammers line the riverbanks to counter the Shahed drones Russia launches from Crimea. The river pilots who navigate these waters do so under the constant threat of attack, yet the traffic volume remains high. This river route provides a vital redundancy. Even if the deep-sea ports of Odessa were to be temporarily incapacitated, the Danube offers a backdoor to Europe that Russia cannot close without physically invading the region, a prospect that is militarily impossible for them at this stage. The strategic depth provided by the Danube, combined with the rail links to Poland and Romania, ensures that Ukraine cannot be fully blockaded. The verified data regarding the Russian missile stocks used in these December attacks paints a picture of a resource-constrained aggressor. The mix of missiles older Kh-22 seconds, which are notoriously inaccurate, combined with newer, scarcer Iskanders and Kinzhals, suggests that Russia is dipping into its strategic reserves. They are firing missiles that were meant for a war with NATO at grain silos in Ukraine. This expenditure of strategic assets for tactical, terror-based gains is unsustainable in the long run. Ukraine, meanwhile, is conserving its high-value Western-supplied missiles like Storm Shadow and ATACMS for high-value targets, command centers, air defense radars, and docked warships. The efficiency ratio heavily favors Kiev. As 2025 draws to a close, the geopolitical ramifications of the Black Sea battle are crystallizing. Russia's ambition to turn the Black Sea into a Russian lake has been definitively shattered. It is now a contested space where NATO surveillance aircraft monitor every Russian move, and Ukrainian drones enforce a zone of denial. The Montreux Convention, managed by Turkey, prevents Russia from bringing in reinforcements from its other fleets to replace losses. The ships that are sunk or damaged in the Black Sea are gone for good, irreplaceably thinning the fleet. Ukraine, on the other hand, is slowly building its Mosquito fleet, receiving more patrol boats and drone components from allies. The trajectory is clear. The Russian fleet is shrinking, while the Ukrainian threat vector is growing. The strikes on civilian vessels, such as the damage to the Turkish ship in Chornomorsk, also carry legal implications. Ukraine is meticulously documenting these attacks as war crimes and violations of the freedom of navigation. These files will form the basis of future reparations claims and international tribunals. Russia is not just losing the war at sea, it is accumulating a debt of liability that will hang over the state for generations. The reckless endangerment of neutral shipping alienates even those nations that have tried to remain neutral. It forces the insurance market to rely on state-backed guarantees, further integrating the Ukrainian economy with its Western backers who provide those guarantees. Ultimately, the story of the intensified deadly strikes in December 2025 is a story of a paradox. The more Russia strikes, the weaker it appears. A superpower does not need to resort to terrorizing grain ships. It enforces a blockade with cruisers and destroyers. That Russia cannot do this, that it must hide its cruisers and rely on missiles fired from hundreds of miles away, is the ultimate admission of defeat at sea. Ukraine has stripped the emperor of his clothes. The Black Sea Fleet is naked, hiding in Novorossiysk, trembling at the sound of a propeller in the water. The subsea baby strike was not just an attack on a submarine, it was a message. We can touch you anywhere. And as long as that threat exists, as long as the grain ships sail under the protection of Ukrainian courage and innovation, Ukraine remains the dominant moral and strategic force in the Black Sea. The missiles may fly and the fires may burn, but the sea no longer belongs to Russia. It belongs to those who dare to sail it, and right now, against all odds, that is Ukraine. The operational details of the drone campaign that facilitated this dominance reveal a level of coordination between intelligence and military branches that has become the hallmark of Ukraine's war effort. The SBU, Security Service of Ukraine, and the Navy do not operate in silos. They function as a fused operational entity. The Sea Baby and Magura drones are often guided by satellite intelligence provided by allied partners, allowing them to traverse the vast emptiness of the Black Sea in radio silence, only activating their terminal guidance systems when in range of the target. This tactic minimizes the window for Russian electronic warfare measures to jam the drones. In the December attacks on Novorossiysk, it is believed that Ukraine utilized a swarm tactic sending decoy surface drones to draw the attention of Russian harbor defenses, while the subsurface Sub-Sea Baby slipped in unnoticed. This level of tactical sophistication exposes the rigidity of Russian defensive doctrines, which are still largely based on Soviet-era threats of large surface combatants and manned aviation, not swarms of small, autonomous robots. Furthermore, the psychological warfare aspect of these drone strikes is profound. Russian military bloggers and Telegram channels, usually sources of ultra-nationalist fervor, have become filled with despair and criticism of the naval command. The inability of the Black Sea Fleet to protect its own flagship, its headquarters, and now its submarines in its safest base, erodes trust in the military leadership. Every successful Ukrainian strike widens the fissures within the Russian power vertical. The dismissal of fleet commanders has become a regular occurrence, yet the systemic issues, lack of situational awareness, poor technological adaptation, and low morale remain unaddressed. Ukraine exploits this command chaos. By keeping the pressure high with constant, unpredictable attacks, they force the Russian leadership to make hasty, reactionary decisions, such as moving ships back and forth or wasting missiles on low-value targets in frustration. The environmental impact of Russia's attacks on the ports also deserves mention, though it is often overshadowed by the human toll. The fires at oil terminals and the potential for chemical leaks from damaged industrial sites pose a threat to the Black Sea ecosystem. However, here too, Ukraine has shown resilience. Emergency services are trained not just in firefighting but in hazardous material containment. The rapid containment of the fires in Odessa following the December 23 strikes prevented a larger ecological disaster, demonstrating the competence of the Ukrainian state services even under extreme duress. This competence stands in stark contrast to the often chaotic and sluggish Russian response to disasters within their own borders. Looking at the broader economic picture, the port strikes are an attempt by Russia to destroy Ukraine's agricultural competitiveness. Russia is a direct competitor in the global grain market. 34, by making Ukrainian grain harder to ship, they hope to capture the market share. However, the market has reacted in ways Russia did not anticipate. The global community recognizes the war premium on Ukrainian grain is a cost of supporting freedom. European initiatives to improve the solidarity lanes, the rail and road connections have accelerated. The strikes have only hastened the integration of Ukraine's infrastructure with the European Union. Where Russia sought to isolate, it has only accelerated connection. The railway gauges are being harmonized, the border crossings expanded. The December 2025 strikes on the bridge to Moldova were an attempt to cut one of these connection points, but the redundancy of the network meant that goods kept moving. The Sub-Sea Baby capability also opens up new strategic possibilities for 2026. If Ukraine can strike submarines in port, it can potentially strike the underwater pipelines that Russia uses to export energy. While Ukraine has shown restraint regarding energy infrastructure to avoid alienating certain partners, the capability acts as a potent deterrent. It signals to Moscow that their own economic lifelines are vulnerable. This fleet in being concept now applies to Ukraine's drone fleet. The mere existence of the capability forces Russia to spend billions on defensive measures, diverting funds from offensive operations. The cost-exchange ratio is brutally effective. A drone costing the price of a luxury car forces the enemy to build harbor defenses, costing millions, and risk assets costing billions. In the final analysis of the late 2025 escalation, the image that endures is not the fire in Odessa, but the grain ship sailing out of the smoke. The Genk T may have been damaged, but other ships took its place the very next day. The port workers, wearing flak jackets and helmets, returned to the gantries. The farmers in the Odessa hinterland continued to prepare their fields for the winter wheat. This unstoppable momentum of daily life, backed by a high-tech, lethal, and victorious naval strategy, is why Ukraine is winning the war for the Black Sea. Russia has missiles, but Ukraine has the sea. And the sea, as history shows, tends to favor the bold. The Russian Federation, for all its bluster and ballistic trajectories, has found itself trapped in a box of its own making, lashed by the waves of a Ukrainian resistance that has proven to be as relentless and deep as the ocean itself. The deadly strikes are the final, violent tantrums of a power that knows, in the cold, dark waters of the night, that it has already lost. The continued operation of the grain corridor is not merely an economic necessity for Ukraine, it is a geopolitical masterstroke. By maintaining the flow of food to countries like Egypt, Bangladesh, and Indonesia, Ukraine cements its relevance to the global order. Russia's attempts to sever this link are seen not just as attacks on Ukraine, but as attacks on the stability of these nations. This dynamic was evident in the diplomatic fallout following the December strikes. Ambassadors from affected nations lodged protests, not just in Kyiv, but in Moscow. The soft power victory of the grain corridor complements the hard power victory of the naval drones. One feeds the world, the other starves the Russian fleet. Together, they form a pincer movement that squeezes Russia's influence in the Black Sea from both sides. As the winter deepens, the resolve of the Ukrainian defenders in the south seems to harden with the frost. The air defense crews, often operating German Gepards or American Patriots, have become the guardians of the city. Their success rate, often exceeding 80–90% against drones and cruise missiles, is the shield that allows the city to breathe. The ballistic missiles that do get through, like those on December 23, are the tragic exceptions, not the rule. And with every engagement, the Ukrainian air defense network learns, adapts, and improves. The data gathered from these strikes is shared with Western partners, improving the algorithms of defense systems globally. In this way, the defense of Odessa contributes to the defense of Berlin, London, and Washington. Russia is revealing its hand, its capabilities, and its limitations, while Ukraine is sharpening the sword that will eventually secure a lasting peace on its own terms. The strikes are deadly, yes. The pain is real. But the dominance of Ukraine in the maritime domain is an irreversible fact of this war, a victory forged in fire and salt water that no amount of Russian missiles can undo. The resilience of the Odessa region is built upon a history of defiance. This is a city that has seen empires rise and fall, and it recognizes the fleeting nature of tyranny. The Russian occupation of the Black Sea is viewed as a temporary aberration. The strikes on the cultural center of the city, damaged in previous attacks and threatened again in December, only serve to remind the world of what is at stake. It is a war of barbarism against civilization. The port, the gateway to the world, represents that civilization. The Russian missile represents the attempt to close the gate. But the gate remains open. The ships sail, the drones hunt, and the sun rises over a Black Sea that is, day by day, becoming a Ukrainian sea once again. The events of late December 2025, the intensified strikes on Odessa and Pivdeny, the damage to the Genk, the historic submarine kill in Novorossiysk paint a comprehensive picture of the war's current trajectory. Russia is escalating its brutality because it has failed in its strategy. It strikes ports because it cannot fight at sea. It targets civilians because it cannot defeat soldiers. Ukraine, conversely, is fighting a war of smart, asymmetric dominance. It has cleared its waters of enemy warships, secured its trade routes, and demonstrated the ability to strike the enemy's most prized assets with impunity. The deadly strikes are the noise of the war. The silence of the Russian fleet is the reality. And in that reality, Ukraine stands tall, the dominant force in the Black Sea, guarding the gates of Europe and feeding the world, undefeated and undeterred.